Hello. So I'm from the LSE, and sort of 48 hours of nerves have gone into this, so hopefully I won't start crying or something. But right, so okay, so I'm looking at the development interface, and I sort of hope to sort of portray how I'm an undergrad student, but I did the anthropology outreach program at LSE, and I just want to show how even at undergraduate level you earn really amazing experiences through the degree, and you can put those into practice in the workplace, even if you don't go on to do PhDs. That's what I hope to get across. So first of all, what is an NGO? I don't like to presume that everyone knows. So a non-governmental organisation, which is an organisation that is not part of the government, typically geared towards humanitarian and development issues. So why are NGOs relevant for anthropology? NGOs, I believe, constitute a worthy focus because they're inevitably having a substantial impact on the communities that form, the sites for anthropological research. We can't deny they're having an impact. And why are they interesting for anthropology? Well, I think it's because, particularly in third world contexts, they're exciting because they form what I call a development interface, which a term I've nicked from sociologist Norman Long. So what this is, it's basically an environment where cultures meet and they interact. And so my research is on the topic of communication within this interface. So I sort of speculated that, surely if these cultures are coming together in such an environment, there must be a sort of recipe for miscommunication and misunderstandings, as well as conscious conflicting interests. And so within this setting, issues of communication are pretty much predisposed occurrences. So what I ask is, how significant are these issues of communication for the implementation of development programs, and what are their repercussions? So essentially it's a study of clashes, contradictions and compromises and the significance of their effects. And my research methods included interview, surveys and of course participant observation. Right, so why Ethiopia? Okay, so most people sort of see Ethiopia as sort of synonymous with famine. I think when you ask most people what's the first image that pops into their mind, it might be sort of a starving child or the like. And that's largely from the 1984 famine in Ethiopia and the huge publicity it received. For example, through Bob Geldof's Live Aid events, which I'm sure you all know. So they say that the world of aid was changed forever, and its face became an Ethiopian, a face in turn that became the rallying symbol for the influx of NGOs into Ethiopia. There's a huge amount of NGOs in the country. So it sort of became an icon for underdevelopment and of poverty. And the financial input of NGOs was actually accounts for a quarter of the national income, so pretty huge. So I figured, if we're going to do a study of the development interface, Ethiopia is a pretty good bet. And so I was lucky that last summer I was invited to work for a small-scale NGO in Addis Ababa, the capital, which was called the Another Chance Association, the ACA. So this is where I was based. It's in Akaki, Addis Ababa, so it was about an hour and a half by 3 minibuses every day on the outskirts of the city. Okay, so the background of the NGO I was working with. So in 2008, it was a German organisation that entered into a partnership with an established Ethiopian NGO named EthioCare. So they came together in order to found its first venture, Another Chance Secretarial College, or ACSC. So this is a vocational college. It teaches administrative assistants in the suburbs of the city, and it seeks to educate young women who, they achieved highly in their secondary school, but they lack the sort of financial means and the social capital to continue their education. They're sort of 18 to 22 years old, so around my age. Okay, so this is how I sort of envisage the development interface in this particular case. We've got the Ethiopian NGO, the German NGO and its volunteers, of which I was one, the college staff and the students, the beneficiaries. So we've got the management level and then the college level. Right. So before I set off, I was started to panic. I was like, what if I don't find what I thought I was going to see? What if everything's running really smoothly and everything's hunky-dory? But unsurprisingly, actually, by my sort of first day, I realised that things were not going so well between the two partners. Their relation had sharply splintered since the inception 2 years earlier. They basically both feel pretty exacerbated with one another. As far as the German organisation, the ACA, were concerned, it was pretty much a dead end. And they'd actually begun a classified legal inquiry into the termination of their contract in pursuit of a new partner. And it was so severe that they actually risked losing all their land and their facilities because of land laws in Ethiopia, so it was obviously pretty bad. So given my aim to investigate whether such issues thwart the goals of development initiatives, I wanted to work out why this had happened. So roughly what I'm going to argue is that despite the fact the future partnership between these two NGOs was in serious doubt, on the surface it would appear that the foundering communicative system is of little hindrance to the smooth running of the college. So you could say, well, it's not really an issue. So the students continue to receive a high quality of education, and any issues were sort of indiscernible to an outside observer. However, there was sort of this great secrecy that surrounds the splintering relationship. It sort of percolated down into the teaching staff. And so it's because it resonated at the college level, the repercussion was sort of this pervasive atmosphere of discomfort. Nobody quite knew what was going on. And moreover, the beneficiaries, they seemed like sort of sheltered from the whole state of affairs, but actually they did suffer from significant miscommunications between themselves and their benefactors, particularly in regard to their representation, which I argue has adverse implications for the socio-psychological impact of the project. So what factors are responsible for this breakdown? So I put on my detective hat and tried to work out what had happened. So the centre of frustration for the German NGO, the ACA, was that the Ethiopian project manager, Atto Abel, wasn't very good. So basically one volunteer complained that he appears to be simply nodding his head and he doesn't manage anything at all. So they presented a gap analysis to the Ethiopian NGO, EthioCare, showing that only 20% of his tasks in a certain 2-month period had actually been completed, but the EthioCare refused to respond. They claimed the findings to be false. So it's quite, sorry, I hope this doesn't seem like institutional gossip. Right, so the ACA speculated, well, there must be something over and above his performance that means that EthioCare have secured him the role. I thought it was no coincidence that actually during the selection procedures of the manager, he was put forward by EthioCare, unlike the other normal routes. And when he himself and another candidate remained, they were the last two remaining, the other hopeful was accused of lying by EthioCare and dismissed from the whole process. So he sort of was put in by default. Also, during my interviews, it was confirmed by the college's administrative employee that himself and Atto Abel, the manager, had worked in the same government department together prior to their appointment with EthioCare. And that he was already acquainted with the EthioCare's director well before the college was created. And when I asked him further about this, he said, "I do not have the courage to tell you anything, please don't ask me." So something was going on there. And so, because I'm an anthropologist, I said, well, is it for cultural reasons? So I asked, is it just a matter of resources? Because Atto Abel, when I asked him, to get his opinion on it, he complained that Europeans, did not have an understanding of how things can be done in what he called an Ethiopian context. And it's true that I'm sure anyone that's worked in Africa, or especially Addis Ababa before this, you sort of notice that if you want to get a decision made, it goes right up the hierarchy and then you have to get it. Nobody can say, even if they have the power or possibility to do so, it's quite a frustrating time. However, sort of other teachers and students complained about his performance as well, so it was a real issue. So basically, tension was apparent between the European NGO on the one hand, who want the project to run to the highest standards, and the Ethiopians on the other, who they claim to know what's actually feasible within their country, which is sort of fair enough. And these tensions spring from what I consider to be insider-outsider status. So the latter, outsider status, can have serious implications within Ethiopia. And so this brings me on to the centre of frustration for EthioCare. It was a seemingly high risk of associating with Europeans themselves. So one staff member sort of remarked, I think ACA needs to understand that government organisations in Ethiopia are not the same as Europe. Ethiopia is obviously notorious for its volatile election periods, as well as the ferocious power of governing bodies and their exercise over civil society. So there was in 2009 the Charities and Societies Proclamation was passed, which put huge constraints on civil society. So it was sort of portrayed as an attempt to promote indigenous Ethiopian organisations to restrict the operation of charities and to deter influences and ultimately to prevent political opposition to the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front. So it was basically all to do with the election. Okay, so given this context, relationships were deeply damaged, especially when the director, EthioCare, unsuccessfully attempted to ban all the foreign members of the college coming in volunteering, which wasn't good for relations. And also another problem was that I found out that a volunteer actually dropped out of the college, even though they got on their visa as working for them, and became an election observer for the European Union. And this sort of direct association, they were seen on TV by one of the teachers, it was awkward. So one teacher said, the government here is serious. Election time was very bitter, especially for NGOs. I saw the danger. Okay, and there was also a sort of food shortage issue, which was another problem. Okay, so relations are bad. In fact, the two directors of the different NGOs hadn't spoken for over a year directly, not even over Skype, so it was a pretty bad situation. Okay, I'm going to try and sort of skip over the teachers quickly because the students are much more interesting. But so basically, while I was there, 10 teachers actually resigned. 10? No, I was there for 10 weeks and 3 teachers resigned. It wasn't that extreme. So I was like, oh, why on earth had that happened? And basically, they didn't understand, because there was all this secrecy, they didn't understand what was going on, but they could sense something was wrong. You know, there was clear signs. Like why isn't the money that's needed to build a third classroom that we need to get the government standards, or why is that not being provided? We're going to be shut down. People didn't want to be associated with this high risk employment. And one teacher said, they keep you in the dark. They keep you in the dark, and after 30 years of experience, I simply don't want to remain in the dark. So it was causing real problems among the staff. So my main concern lies with the fourth and final category of actor, which is the students themselves. So there was 30 enrolled students. They're all from disadvantaged backgrounds, and many of them are orphans. Ethiopia is home to around 5 million orphans, 30% of which due to HIV/AIDS. So my focus is on how the students themselves experience and make sense of the development process they are participating in, and how they believe they're perceived and represented. And this concern with sort of representation was due to the following incident. So soon after I arrived, a journalist was invited to the college in order to write an article for an Ethiopian newspaper. The reporter sort of removed the girls from the classrooms, pulled them out and said, "Are you an orphan?" And when the girl wasn't, they just put them back inside. So a few of the girls cried. It was pretty extreme. So it was made worse by the fact that the article was actually published in an Ethiopian newspaper during the girls' internship programs. And in more than one case, the girls' new sort of colleagues, they felt very independent and they were excited about it, but their new colleagues would read the article and then, Azush, don't know if anyone speaks Amharic now, I'm sorry. So even though the article was a positive review of the college, in the beneficiaries' eyes, this attention was really unwanted and several of the girls cried following this. So this highlighted to me how the students are stuck in a sort of paradoxical situation. So the college provides a path to autonomy, but at the same time, they're dependent in every way. They must therefore endure what one student described to me as an embarrassment as exchange for both education and housing. And this embarrassment derives from the necessity to use their identity as poor in order to obtain much needed support from the initiative. So while they're trying to sort of transcend their past, their situation naturally entails constant reminders of their prior pain and their state of dependency through the publicity policies of the NGO. Okay, so according to the UN definition, they're not actually technically orphans, and they sort of struggle with their past, and students express feelings of frustration when they're referred to in this way. And they suffer from the NGO's use of what they call stupid words. And as one student explained, I have learned patience. In order to continue my education, I have to tolerate others whilst they are insulting me. So the most significant reference to this use of stupid words was in the way students believe that their identities are represented. So sort of when female orphans are let down by traditional social support systems, they're regarded to sort of lead a volatile adult, maybe go into prostitution and the like. And one orphanage social worker they interviewed said they have to sort of make a curfew so the girls don't venture out to the city. So it is a real problem in Ethiopia, and ACA's aim sort of that they express is to stop what's referred to as a cycle of poverty. So socially destitute women, they engage in prostitution, they contract HIV/AIDS, they have more orphans, so it's a perpetual cycle. And I sort of discovered that while prostitution may have been a means of self-support for some, if they didn't get into the college, the ex-social worker sort of explained that, and the survey that conducted showed how the majority would have just continued to work alongside their evening class studies. And one student explained how she understood the need to portray them in this vulnerable manner to attract donors, but its usage remained sort of abhorrent to her, you know, and it was repugnant to her Christian beliefs. And she said, I understand that they have to say disadvantaged backgrounds, but I am not a student. I am a student, I'm not a street girl. I'm not a prostitute, they use these kind of words. So the girls dislike reminders about their dependency in reference to their disadvantaged backgrounds, but they detest remarks regarding the potential of prostitution. And now the most significant implication of this representation has actually sprung from the local community itself. A student explained how as the girls sort of walk to college, they live in accommodation about 15 minutes away. Some people, particularly sort of young men, make remarks. She gave one example of the kind of comments she received. So, where do you come from? Addis Ababa. No, you don't. You lie. I know you're having sex with people. So whilst their stories may facilitate donations back in Europe, in Ethiopia, certain members of the local community view such stories in a very different light. There is therefore a major mismatch between who the students think they are, how they think they're being represented, and further how the community perceives them. Okay. This is also exacerbated by a notion in Ethiopia, highlighted by the social worker and other teachers, that a beneficiary sort of believes that the donations from abroad are sourced by using individual names opposed to a group. So it sort of adds a personal element leading to further misunderstanding. Okay, so to conclude, so as expected, I did find serious miscommunication within the development interface, and sort of despite the seemingly smooth running of the college itself, the issues have percolated down to staff members, causing problems there. And sort of a quote from Emma Guest's work on orphanhood: NGO leaders believing so passionately in their cause sometimes find it hard to learn from or cooperate with others who have different ideas about how to reach the same goals. And I would say, you know, this certainly characterises a development interface, but I also argue that difficulties to cooperate can stifle what the NGO leaders were initially passionate about in the first place and why they were created, the beneficiaries. So it's too easy to sort of overlook how inevitable misunderstandings within this kind of organisation can impact, you know, amongst the most important actor of all, the students themselves, and even spread beyond the organisation into the community itself. Thank you.